Big Blue Files of the internet, we are getting dangerously close to the halfway point of the year, which means we're getting a ton of cover reveals and synopsis reveals for books coming out in the second half of 2026. And I am duty bound to share some of the releases that I'm anticipating most with all of you. Again, these are all books releasing in the second half of the year, and they're organized according to release date, starting with a couple of August releases. First is Back for Blood, Never Whistle at Night Part 2, edited once again by Shane Hawk and Theodore C. Van Aus Jr., and coming out on August 18th. In case you somehow don't know, Never Whistle at Night was a really remarkable anthology of dark fiction and horror written by Indigenous authors that came out a few years ago in 2023. As you can see, this is a follow-up anthology of the same genre and nature, and hopefully featuring even more new and exciting Indigenous voices. The first anthology struck a really great balance of including both established and up-and-coming authors in the horror and dark fiction spaces. I discovered Carson Faust, for example, in the first anthology, whose debut Southern Gothic novel has come out since, so I hope I can discover even more promising authors to read from in this second book. Then we have But I Hate Him by Paige Powers, which comes out on August 25th. This is Paige's third YA novel. It's another queer contemporary rom-com about academic rivals Rory and Luca. Rory is heir to the most successful tutoring company in the world, which means he can't afford to be anything less than the perfect student. Luca, on the other hand, is an infuriatingly hot hockey player who wins every academic competition without even trying. After a mortifying public outburst, Rory decides the best way to rehab his image is to win at the most cutthroat academic camp in the country known as Brain, and it seems like he might easily take that top spot until Luca suddenly shows up and ruins all his best laid plans. Listen, I have yet to read a Paige Powers book that I didn't love. He has this really shitposty, tongue-in-cheek kind of humor that I find really endearing and entertaining to read. I enjoy rom-coms about academic rivals as well, so I think I'm really going to enjoy this. Speaking of queer, I also have my eye on a sapphic fantasy called The Siren's Kiss by Leslie Vedder, which comes out on September 1st. As I said, this is a sapphic fantasy romance featuring pirates and sirens. It's about a pirate named Rayleigh who laid hands on a legendary ruby belonging to the sea god Red-Handed Roger, and from that moment, she and her ship became eternally cursed. Years later, she's plotting a way to regain her freedom, and there's a legend that Red-Handed Roger's heart was stolen by the Sea Witch, so she figures if she can steal the heart back, she can bargain for her release. But she isn't the only one with a score to settle. There's a mermaid named Marin whose brother was taken by the Sea Witch, and she's come to the surface to get him back and also save the last remaining mermaids in the process. And so Rayleigh and Marin will have to work together if they hope to pull off their plans. Honestly, I don't need to know much more than that. I'm always down for a sapphic pirate mermaid romance and adventure, and I think this one sounds really great. Just the other day, the cover reveal for They Called Us Wicked by Gloria Munoz came across my feed, and it comes out on September 1st. I believe this is described as a YA fantasy dystopia perfect for fans of Taylor K. Mejia and A.M. Macklemore, which I am. It's about 4 Bruja BFFs who are all part of a coven together and have been best friends ever since they met in the astral plane, especially as kids who had to hide their magical gifts from the rest of the world. But they've never actually met each other in person until now. Lucy is starting college at Fletcher University, where she's looking forward to hanging out with her coven after classes. But there seems to be something off about her roommate, Retta, who seems like she might have latent magical abilities that she's somehow not aware of. So when Retta suddenly disappears, Lucy knows it's up to her and her coven to investigate. There's so much about this that is absolutely up my alley. I love stories about magical friend groups, I love stories about amateur sleuths trying to solve a mystery or track down a missing person, so I think me and this book are gonna get along just fine because it seems like it has those things in spades. I'm also very intrigued by An Immaculate Deception by Isabella Levino, which also comes out on September 1st. This is a gothic horror novel set in 1870s Brazil and following a pregnant woman named Madalena who was raised in a deeply religious household and is now carrying a child that was conceived in sin according to her family's beliefs. So now her only viable choices are either to marry or to surrender the child, and she's almost certain that the father of her child will take responsibility and marry her, but just as she's about to break the news to him, their carriage careens off the road, and the next thing she knows, she's waking up in his secluded home under the care of a mysterious physician. And the longer she stays there, the more it seems clear that something is seriously wrong with this house. Her suitor is unraveling, the doctor might be hiding something even darker, and now she and her unborn child are trapped in a decaying house of secrets. This is very much my shit. I love gothic horror, especially when it comes from a Latina perspective, which I think we don't see nearly enough of. It feels like this is very much in the tradition of stories like Mexican Gothic, The Hacienda, and so many others, so I cannot wait. Keeping in the realm of historical horror, I'm also really psyched about Kay Ancram's next release, which is a YA book called Adam Mine that comes out on September 8th. This is a queer YA Frankenstein retelling about Victor, a 17-year-old prodigy who wants nothing more than for his peers at university to respect him and take him seriously. And after suffering a public humiliation, he hastily makes a bet with one of his peers that he will discover the secret to reanimation before he graduates. And in his desperation to make good on his word, he ends up kidnapping a young man from a nearby village and destroying his body using untried, untested forms of alchemy instead of science. The young man in question, Elias, awakens to discover that his body has been irrevocably changed. His voice is gone, his skin is stitched and scarred, and he can no longer return home. And to make things worse, whatever alchemy Victor tried to perform has created some kind of magical bond between them where they can now constantly feel each other's emotions. If you know anything about me, you know I love Frankenstein. It's an inherently queer, trans story in my very humble opinion, and I will happily read any retelling or reimagining and watch any visual adaptation. This sounds like a really incredible new take on the story, and I cannot wait to read it. Next, I want to talk about Grim Tidings by B.K. Borison, which comes out on September 15th. This is the companion/sequel to Good Spirits, which was a really fun, creative, whimsical, romantic spin on A Christmas Carol that introduced us to this world of spirits and reapers who have power over the afterlife. This second book is about a Grim Reaper named Darcy who is tired of being a Reaper and decides that instead of dragging her next assignment into the underworld, she is going to save him instead. But there's a slight snag in her plan because she runs into a guardian angel named Gabriel who doesn't especially care for Grim Reapers that step outside of their jurisdiction, but he's also beginning to realize that Darcy may not be what she seems. Quite honestly, I wouldn't even need a synopsis to want to read this book. Good Spirits absolutely blew me away when I read it at the end of last year, so much so that it became one of my favorite books of 2025. I thought it was a tremendous romance and a really creative spin on a paranormal romance of sorts, so there's absolutely no question as to whether I'm going to pick up this second book. It's gonna happen. Very recently, I saw the cover for Isn't He Romantic by Adib Khorram, which comes out on September 22nd. This is the third companion book in the Love on the Vine series, which began with I'll Have What He's Having. Each book follows a different character in this Persian-American friend group, but each book stands on its own, so you can read them in any order you like. This third book follows Arya, who's never been much for romance, but with all his friends pairing off, he's beginning to question his life choices, especially when he discovers that his latest hookup, Ben, is the new committee chair for the big charity ball that Arya's company has been planning for months. Ben, on the other hand, is not especially looking forward to spending a lot of time with the one-night stand who ghosted him, and to make things worse, his ex-boyfriend shows up out of nowhere looking for a reunion, so naturally he panics and claims that he's moved on, with none other than Arya. This is another case where I wouldn't even need a cover or a synopsis to be convinced to read this. I really enjoyed both of Adib's adult romances so far. They're fun, they're sexy, but they're also heartfelt, and I expect this third book to be no different. Speaking of new releases from longtime favorite authors, I'm also excited for Our Untamed Core by Sonido Reyes, which also comes out on September 22nd. This is actually Sonido's first YA dystopian novel. It's pitched as The Hunger Games meets the Sun Bear Trials, and it's about a boy named Temo who's always lived under the rule of the conquistadors and spent his life obeying the Holy Order's decree, undergoing sacraments to tame his so-called violent nature, but he's also hiding the fact that he is trans. If the truth about his gender identity is discovered, he'll be forced to enter El Torneo, a brutal fight-to-the-death game that pits Untamed against Untamed. Normally, Temo has done everything in his power to avoid that fate, but when his boyfriend is unexpectedly arrested and thrown into the tournament, Temo will do anything to rescue him, even if it means entering the games himself. I'm super intrigued by this one. Like I said, it's so different from anything Sonido's written before. They usually write contemporary YA and contemporary adult romance, so I love seeing that they're taking really big swings and exploring new genres. Dystopia is definitely having a resurgence, I think, and I'm really excited to see their take. Another one of my faves, Aaron Cotter, is coming out with a new book called A Dangerous Bargain, which also comes out on September 22nd. This is another queer historical YA novel from Aaron Cotter, but this one is set during the Italian Renaissance era and has fantasy elements. In this version of the Italian Renaissance, angels walk among humans, bestowing their talents and blessings for a price. And in order to support his struggling family, 17-year-old artist Virgil has already bargained away most of his life. In a deeply ironic twist of fate, his brother goes missing, and the only thing that might rescue him and spare his life is more magic. With only months left to live, Virgil is desperate enough to do the one thing he swore he would never do: team up with his infuriating fellow apprentice, Leonardo da Vinci. And as the two journey through the gilded streets of Florence, they will discover all the city's darkest secrets hidden beneath the surface. Again, Aaron Cotter has published 2 books so far that I've really enjoyed. They've both been really interesting and unique takes on historical fiction set during time periods we don't often get to see in the YA space, and this book seems to be doing even more of that, but with a cool, magical twist. I don't think this next book really needs an introduction or any additional hype, but I did want to state for the record that I'm very interested in Becky Chambers' new book that was recently announced. It's called As You Wake, Break the Shell, and it comes out on October 13th. I believe this is the first installment in a new sci-fi duology from Becky Chambers. It's a sapphic sci-fi epic set on a resource-poor planet known as Fortune, where 2 characters, Signy and Cora, are destined to meet. Signy is a brilliant but reclusive botanist who bioprints medicine in her small plant shop, and Cora is one of the few people who can pilot the massive living ships that connect the scattered settlements of their solar system. But one of the side effects of piloting is known as mind bleed, which is what brings Cora into Signy's shop in the first place. I honestly don't know much more than that, and while I haven't read every single Becky Chambers book in existence, this new book does really pique my interest, and I'm curious to see where it might go. On a very different note, I was also psyched to see that Stephen Graham Jones has a new book coming out this fall. It's called Off the Reservation, and it also comes out on October 13th. This is actually a spin-off of The Only Good Indian set 5 years after the events of that book, and it follows Nate, one of the only survivors of a deadly massacre that took place on the Blackfeet Reservation. And even though his life is in shambles and his best friend is barely hanging on to life, 4 Blackfeet elders share a vision quest with him that might just change his fate. His mission is to find the bones of a young Blackfoot boy who died at the infamous Carlisle Indian Industrial School and bring them back home. But once he retrieves the bones, it becomes clear that something else has come back with them. Again, you do not need to twist my arm and try to convince me to read a Stephen Graham Jones book. I will happily read anything and everything he writes. He doesn't usually do series or continuations, so I'm very curious to see what this book brings to the table in that sense. I might have actually lost it when I saw the announcement for this next book, which is written by another favorite author of mine who's also stepping into a new genre and one that I very much love. I am, of course, talking about The Unhaunting by Micaiah Johnson, which is also coming out on October 13th. This story begins with a house that was built at the end of the Civil War when a daughter of the Confederacy made what she believed to be an innocent wish, to have a home where nothing bad could happen. But almost 200 years later, a group of friends are going to move into that same house and find out what happened to all that pent-up darkness. Chantel's best friend Avery tells her that she's just inherited this incredible house, and as soon as they go to check it out, all sort of good things start happening to them. But they soon realize that they are not walking alone in Abernathy House, and that the only thing worse than a haunted house might be a house that desperately wants to be haunted. This seems like a really interesting twist on a haunted house narrative, and again, Micaiah Johnson, who's been known to write badass sci-fi, is definitely stepping into a new genre here, and I cannot wait to see how she reimagines all the trappings of a haunted house. Penultimately, for today, I wanted to show some love for Danica Nava's next release, which is called Sunflower Season and comes out on October 20th. I believe this is another Indigenous adult romance from Danica Nava about June Walker, who is drained by her high-pressure tech job and dreams of escaping into the countryside. So she decides to quit her job and buy an old sunflower farm out in Oklahoma where she was raised as a kid. Not only is she having a hell of a time restoring the farm to its former glory, but she also runs into Noah Abbott, her first love and the boy she left behind in Oklahoma when her world imploded at 17. So the two of them will have to reckon with their past, with their unresolved feelings, and decide whether their love is worth replanting and bringing back to life. I have thoroughly enjoyed both of Danica Nava's romances so far. I'm a sucker for a good second chance romance, especially between childhood sweethearts or childhood friends, so needless to say, I am very excited for this. And even though there are many, many more upcoming releases to be excited about, the last one I'm going to mention for today is none other than You're No Better by Andrew Joseph White, which comes out on October 20th. This is Andrew's return to queer YA horror. It seems to be more of a horrific thriller about Morgan, a 17-year-old autistic trans boy who's actually responsible for putting his serial killer father behind bars. But despite the role he played in bringing his dad to justice, everyone around him assumes that Morgan is going to grow up to be a violent killer himself. So Morgan latches on to his father's final unidentified victim, convincing himself that if he unravels the mystery, he'll prove that he's better than his father. But that puts him in the path of his classmate Felicity Keating, who knows the truth about Morgan, that he wasn't just a witness to his father's brutality, but also possibly an accomplice. Andrew Joseph White has never once missed in his life, no matter what genre or age category he's writing within. Obviously, I love what he's doing in the YA space, especially making room to tell stories about trans kids just fighting to exist and fighting to survive in a deeply horrific world. And I think this new book absolutely fits into that project. So there you have it. If I've counted correctly, that should be 15 new books slated for release in the second half of 2026. As I said, there's definitely a lot to look forward to, not just with the books I mentioned here, but with the plethora of exciting books still to come in 2026. If you want to share even more forthcoming releases, feel free to drop those down below in the comments. But that is everything I had to share for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.